Welcome to Woods and the Sound, a monthly audio series held by Foresta Collective, where we converse, listen to, and exchange with humans and modern humans in dedication to the emergence of an imaginary for a more ecological and connected being in the world. Monthly themes are sprouting from Foresta Lexicon and are explored deeper in our Ecologies of Attention Dojo, an online community of practice for this time in between paradigms. As things become more fluid and less fixed, we believe it's important to hold spaces for slow discernment, reconnection to a more embodied presence, and poetic outlook. As you are listening to conversations, practice, and soundscapes in this podcast, we encourage you to pay attention to resonances also as a physical experience and reverberations of breath.
In this episode, we are learning from plants, paying close attention to the rhizome, a subterranean plant stem that sends out roots and shoots from its nodes. Rhizome is carrying multiple meanings within it, and we want to acknowledge the influence of Gilles Deleuze and Felix Guattari in our thinking about rhizomes. However, we are not interested in a purely philosophical discourse, but rather in thinking how, learning from rhizome, can we find new ways for being together differently, in a shared space, in the seen and the unseen worlds, in the space of radical beginnings. Rhizome offers us to think of poetics of interconnectedness, of a structure without a center, of a fundamental openness to new connections, to emergence, respecting multiplicity, heterogeneity, and a process that is open for encounters with the outside, and defined by the ability to form symbiotic connections, adding different dimensions. We also relate to an incompleteness and complexities of the rhizome metaphor and of learning from and with plants in general. We invited Philip Coleman, a designer working with food and plants, for a conversation, which was recorded on the market square of a small village in Südtirol. In the practice part of this episode, we explore rhizomatic connections within the context of Topolo, a village in northeastern Italy, very close to the border with Slovenia, where a cultural association, Robida, is rethinking art residentiality in marginal areas. The metaphor of a rhizome and learning from plants inspired both the how and the what of our conversation, while pondering the ideas for looking at the village as an intelligent organism, a self-organizing body, a network, a structure without a center. People who took part in this conversation are Jack Bardwell, Kim Lang, Elena Braida, Philip Coleman, Aliash Shklep, Timon and Jesse from Studio Wild Architecture, Matteo and Natalia from Società Esoterica dell'Illusionismo Critico, and other humans associated with Robida, who was the host and cultural association in the village of Topolo. So this Russian artist, and from Moscow,
For me, most exciting things to be the summers always in Switzerland now, to follow these seasons, but also what I'm used from at home. And this, like in these 8 years that I lived in the Netherlands, or these 5 years of intensive studies in the Netherlands, I lost a lot of this connection to the season. And with the season there comes the season of the animals, the season of the plants, the season of harvest. And now being in Switzerland, I also, that was the first rural environment where also my professional practice found application that I was building up in the Netherlands. And then I had to get used to the fact that in the Netherlands I could just, as we spoke before, I was making the schedule. I was responsible for the schedule. But then also, if I did not hold on to that schedule, I felt guilty because I set this goal, I didn't achieve it, and I think this creates a lot of pressure. That was especially for me in urban environments. It creates a lot of pressure. You make appointments, you have to go to these appointments. Nothing can break this appointment except of really severe disease or even worse. Like the weather is not the reason to not go to that meeting or to not achieve that goal. But when you're when you live in an environment where you so much depend on these other species, then I had to learn to respect their rhythm, that they are giving the tune to my rhythm. And I think this if you allow yourself to fall into that can be a huge relief.
Right, and it makes me think how, also what we spoke about just now, how this kind of human mastery and human control, cities became these spaces where we reign, the humans reign, we decide where things will be built, who is allowed to live there,
how the river flows,
yes. Like we are completely in control, and which is on the one hand like as if gives us this very safe feeling that okay, we decide, but actually it's also an illusion, because after all, we are on the planet, little piece of dust, beautiful living organisms that surround us in the cosmos and in this huge unknown space, and thinking of what you are saying now, so actually tuning into seasons and tuning into other creatures, we can unlearn our mastery, but also to find a balance and to be more real, actually, to become more real, instead of trying to live in this illusion of controlling reality.
Yeah, with real you mean being connected to all these other life forms that we depend upon.
Yes, definitely. This kind of acknowledging the worlds that sustain us, but also it is more real also because now Corona, for example, also is showing us that we are not in control, that things happen, and then and we need to just be well with unknown also, and to be to this kind of let go of this idea of controlling reality around us, and like be more with attention. And this is what I also really like, how you gave this example of the cranberries, and you collect them until a certain point, and then they are not ripe yet, so you need to wait. So through attentiveness to the living landscape, you actually also become more real in this way, because you don't grab them because you already said to the shop or to the supermarket that you will bring them that and that amount of cranberries. You are really there to notice what is possible now.
But that's why this kind of product development that we are trying to do, or this creating an infrastructure for these resources of the land, it's not something that happens within a summer. No, it happens through years. Because this is how you learn to read, and to read how things grow, but also how they behave with the season and with the rain, with the amount of water, with the sun. You even see that at some spots where you could guess that there is less sunlight, the fruits also look different. They taste different. They look different. And I think this is really beautiful if you allow yourself to recognize these things above like mass of collecting or the goal of collecting.
I'm curious, maybe also actually, Philip, for you, like for your work, when did you start working with plants, or how did it happen that you got curious in plants?
When did I really focus? I think for me first in a focus was the microbiology, like really looking at this interspecies communication of fungi, bacteria, and first with us. So I was first looking at this microbe and our body, and then I think really naturally it was just a matter of time that the plant would appear, because they represent this bridge between us and the soil, for example. We're not eating soil yet, but we're eating the plants. So, this is then what caught for me this attention that microbes are like being the bridge between us and other species, either in eating or just like physically interacting with. I think that's when and then a bit through gardening, I started looking at this interaction between soil ecology, plant ecology, and then food ecology, how microbiological activities are being carried onto the plants, and then from the plants, by processing them into food and fermentation, you carry on this ecology from the ground to the plant, and then further to our food, and then to our body. And then if you spin it further, then it goes back into the soil, ideally. Like this very idealized circle of and that these microbes are really like they're present from the beginning till the end, and then constantly present.
Yeah, this is super interesting. Lynn Margulis, the biologist and evolutionary theorist, she spoke about how bacteria are our common ancestors, and then at some point
exactly.
they decided to, some of them developed into animals, or humans and other animals, some developed into plants and some into mushrooms and so on and so forth. So there was like this, as if a moment of decision, of course we cannot know, but how kind of the microorganisms are always there and continue to be there, and how this, in this cycle, actually microorganisms who are more or less constant, right? Like if you go to the soil, to the plant, to the human, to the other animal, back to the soil, so they are the ones who are actually still...
They're in charge, after all. But yeah, Lynn Margulis, I loved it when she started, or for me, she was really opening up this world of that, where I loved, there's one part where she's talking about how certain microbes or fungi decided to team up. She's very often, I think, using this term teaming up.
And also with agency of a decision.
Yeah, like, again, either it was for survival or reproductive purposes. Certain microbes would team up with plant cells and then evolved in photosynthesizing plant cells that came from the cyanobacteria. And like all these kind of processes also in our body, like all these metabolic processes that they all because they started teaming up with other molecules or cells. Yeah.
Right, and what I really like about this, and again maybe it's something that because in my work I'm interested in resonance, and how it also, this teaming up feels like it's rooted in this resonance, like, oh, we like each other, let's team up and let's do this, or let's try to become this. And I guess it's of course not maybe so articulated, but it's like there's other ways of knowing also where we humans try to go towards. It's more intuitive ways to perceive reality, more embodied ways to perceive reality and to make decisions instead of kind of very logical and rational only. And when you also use this word teaming up, it sounds to me a bit like there is a resonance involved in making almost like coalitions together.
That's. I mean, I don't know about the etymological background of teaming up, but I think that's the nice thing of it, that it usually indicates that there is an exchange of services, of activities, of like helping each other, but then still achieving the same goal, whatever that goal might be.
And do you feel that in your work this exchange is happening? Like now, for example, when you're approaching plants, I don't know if maybe you can also introduce a little bit this project that you're working on now, and if you feel this exchange, if you feel you are teaming up.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's still for me always a bit of a delicate thing because sometimes I don't feel, I don't have the right to say that, because most of the time I still feel that plants or microbes, they serve me much more than I can serve them. I think if I would not be here, they would be also happy. like they would still do their things that they always do. I often feel that I'm more of a also sometimes intruder or like a bit invasive, like that. But still, with this fruit tree project, I see the value in highlighting the qualities of what is already there. And as we spoke, like if you're capable of making something that is being eaten or drunk, and then at the same time communicate the story of the season or the story of the wild plant, and the domesticated plant originates from the wild plant, and how similar they are in taste, but also how they can accomplish each other. I think there is always I do that because it has a certain purpose, and it's a purpose that can be understood by as many people as possible. So I think then it depends always on the consumer to be curious or interested in reading the whole story behind it, or just enjoy it sensorially. Where I do, what for me was always really fascinating is this mythology of the kefir grains, of the milk kefir, for example. This very fascinating symbiosis between yeast and lactic acid bacteria that some say originate from the body of an animal, because just the microbiological communities that are involved in kefir are very similar to raw milk cultures. And that's somehow, but these kefir in so many, especially Eastern European cultures, and Asia also, they were the only way how to consume milk. And I think this for me represents a really, I think, authentic symbiotic relationship between microbes and humans. And just because this kefir grains, we didn't invent them, they invented themselves. And then they went into an interrelationship with humans, because we made sure that they would reproduce, or that they could live on, by giving them the right conditions. Same with us with sourdough or other kombucha. Like, it's all these kombucha and vinegar also, it's all these symbiosis between two very for each other unnative organisms that evolved into this relationship and then became useful to us, which I think is really fascinating, because we didn't invent this organism making vinegar or soured milk, but they did it, and then we discovered, hey, this is happening and it's good for us. So I always wonder, how is, I mean, this is just amazing. How is that possible that something happens like this, and then we just like pick it up and then use it?
Yeah, and I guess this is also where attention comes in again, right? Because it takes a human to notice that, actually this is really tasty.
You have to observe it, because they, like, same as plants, they need so specific conditions, and if you don't follow these rules that they kind of give us, then they look for a different environment where they can survive.
Yeah. If you could say a little bit about this project that you're working on now with the wild fruit, and like what it is about for you, and how do you approach it?
And now what I'm further working on is how to create products with merging wild fruits and products together with the domesticated ones, to again create this relationship between the bigger landscape and the micro landscape of the cultivated land. Because you have, except of apples, but you have wild plums, you have a lot of wild berries that became kind of domesticated ones.
And why do you feel it's important to connect the wild plums or wild apples with domesticated fruit?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, to be honest, I think it because I have the feeling often the wild plants, because they're more rare and because they're also much more depending on they're much more attuned with the seasons. They just have the higher value often, like they're being considered as precious. And even though I believe that it's not really doesn't make sense at all, but still, if it is an argument to make the house apple more precious by adding wild cherries, then I think it tells something about where the things come from. So again, in those products, it would be the main goal is to create the link between the product and the land. And I think there again, it's about this symbiotic relationship that if you know how to, it's always this, what's the use of it? It's same for the kefir. If the kefir doesn't have an environment where he can really profit and grow in it, then he says goodbye. So.
But actually, the symbiotic relationship, it depends on this, being well somewhere and being in symbiosis, in resonance, in like wishing to do it, basically. In a way, the rhizome is about being open to this symbiotic connections and making connections. And what you are speaking about, to me, it sounds like you are bringing a lot this mindset into your projects, into your work, and looking at interconnectedness and looking at this kind of fundamental openness to connections between the domesticated and the wild, and so on and so forth. Right, like also with the microbes, like you're saying, well, actually they will connect to each other and they will reproduce and they will things will start happening if these connections, if the symbiotic connections will be possible. And we kind of do you see your kind of place or role, or I don't know how to call this, do you see your engagement as a way to create conditions for these connections to happen?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's my ultimate goal. That's I would have never been able to formulate it that way, but I think that's what I'm trying to achieve with it. Not just And I think I just had to think of because there's this really tiny plum, Schledorn. It's like with a lot of thorns, and it grows on, like in a lot of in between acres. You have bushes of these, and they're hardly being used because it's like 2/3 seed and 1/3 meat, but they have a really strong flavor. And by putting them next to a real plum, like a Zwetschge, it has a lot of meat, really sweet. And it's for the people that don't know that the one is originating from the other one. But when you put them next to each other, or when you combine them in a product, for example, and you experience those two things through flavor, then you recognize, oh wow, it's like the small one and the big one. They come from the same. So I think it's also like not teaching, but learning these connections and these origins of these things through smell and taste, which is something that is it's always very easily understood for people. Like you smell it and you taste it. So there is no question of culture or nature, or like there's no complexity of words, or of it's just that's it. And this I think is really beautiful.
Good. And when you say they come from the same, so like from the same family, or you feel they just belong together, kind of taste-wise?
No, yeah, like for me, as I'm often busy with developing sensorial pleasing products, it is like there's a very practical functionality in putting these two things together, because the complexity of flavor rises in a good way because they accomplish each other, like just by nature. They really do, like these. You have the bitterness, you have the sourness, you have the sweetness. So it's all coming together.
And it also reminds me actually of the Zen cuisine, like in the Zen way of cooking, you need to combine like all these different tastes, the bitter, the sour, the sweet, right?
And then the umami really merges it together. Yeah.
And this is also then also about diversity, right? Like that it's not just this one sweet taste and then it's like a sugary whatever, like the candies, that we sometimes may be addicted to or whatever, but it's like really creating a complexity of taste through enriching diversity.
Yeah, I mean, then there is also really interesting topic of our sensorial sensitivities, if we are
capable of noticing.
Capable of noticing nutrients, the lack of nutrients, the over presence of nutrients. Like umami is such an important thing in that, because it indicates that there is a very rich amount of all the amino acids that our body needs for cell reproduction. So there's a very very functional origin in these flavors. Then you have other flavors that indicate this or indicate that. Bitterness often indicates the presence of poison, so it's plants produce bitterness to kind of not be eaten like the other species.
And thinking again with this openness to connections and creating conditions for connections, and how it is also reflected in our own bodies, and thinking of the holobiont, the notion of holobiont and the microbiome, and that actually a healthy microbiome is also a diverse microbiome, the diversity of bacteria, but also an environment where they actually want to connect to each other. Again, this creating conditions for right, that they want to connect, that they want to form this rhizomatic network or whatever we can call it, and that in a way, like what we put into ourselves from the environment is so important, because this becomes part of our microbiome, and through that we create conditions of connections.
Yeah. So once I think, because again, if it's functional for us, then it's much easier for us to perform these things. But I think once you understand that by doing something good to the plants, you also do something good to you, and again, it's like this.
It's a rhizomatic connection.
It's so easy but so difficult to
symbiosis.
Yeah.
Right. Why is it so difficult, do you think?
I think because we're so complicated. We're so complicated.
How did we become so, like, why are we so complicated? Why not to kind of just... I guess this is also where the body becomes interesting, because for the body things are very simple. I'm hungry, I eat, I'm thirsty, I drink, I want to sleep, I go to sleep. It's like listening. It's like with the seasons. It's simple. Like, it's summer, nice, we can be outdoors. It's raining, well, let's go in, let's hide somewhere. Like, it's very simple. So I guess like we are missing now this simplicity. We became so highly intellectually complex that we are getting lost in our own. We turn complexity into complications.
I think this expectation of productivity is one of the biggest disease in our current culture. Like this, what does it mean to be productive? And I think this is really a big wall that it has to be put down.
And that's why it's so interesting, this project with the wild and domestic fruit that you're working on, because it's not efficient. It's like, it's like what you were saying, like it's not this. It's not an environment that is favorable for productivity, but rather for creativity.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think this is really nice. Yeah.
We began the conversation with an embodied exercise to connect to the breath, to expand, to sense the body in space, to feel the ground through the feet.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about that, about this sort of distribution of I don't know if it's not necessarily power, and sometimes it's responsibility, or I think the thing is that when we were talking about ISBA perhaps becoming a central place, and someone said that it really helped their thinking about it. And I think at the time it did help to switch our thinking from that residency building being the central topic to changing it as a trigger for us to then think about it from a different perspective, a different center. But then, then it was saying, okay, well, we've done that shift now. We've managed to take that extreme to make us, like, in our heads move away from it. But really what we're talking about is not having something that is considered the center and trying to look at it as a network. I think the issue really arises when, and it was clear when it said this helps me think about it, when someone said that, it meant, and I also think it's about how we want to communicate outside of this place, because I think having it's like auteur theory as well, like with directors of films, like having someone that is responsible for something and gets like the credit for something is actually really useful for people to understand how things work, because it's hard for us to see a complete network in one go. And I think, this idea of, and I also find it difficult in my process of like, do I start with these narrative, like overall ideas for things, or from an object or from something that then can go out into these other aspects? Because I think sometimes it's quite useful, like you also then see it with Rabida, the magazine. It's not like that is a focus, but then really it becomes about all these other things, about the content that people create. When someone's writing something for it, then it's their little world is the node where they're creating content for it. And then the fact it brings this community together. And if you started a project and said, I need a way to make 6 people around the world do some writing, 4 people visit us for this thing, like I need to create all of those things as separate nodes, maybe down the line you'd come to a magazine as the format or ISBA as the format, but it's quite hard to start from that point of the rhizomatic thing. And I think you also see it because it's something that grows more organically. But I think maybe it's about, I don't know, then it's maybe a conversation of what's communicated outside of it. It's not possible to communicate everything at once. So what is useful for the structure here as a way of thinking about things, and what's useful for how we talk about things would, for example, be useful if there's ISBA and people, when they're coming for the residency, think, I'm going to this cafe in the remote area thing to do something for that, rather than, or do we want people to think, I'm going to a community to be a part of lots of bits of it and I don't know what yet. Sort of, I think there's a shift of thinking. I could keep deviating, but that's my initial thoughts.
Well, what you just said in connection to Enea is like, if I want to embody it again, is maybe it's also the village as a body, and all these houses are different organs, and sometimes one organ has a very specific role or needs a very specific focus because there is a disease or it's weak, and then you need to eat a certain specific food or nutrients to nourish it. And so maybe the new house, it's an organ that is already in the body, but we don't really know what role it has and what it serves the whole organism too. So now to shift this focus to ISBA again, for me also helped a lot to say like, maybe it's the heart.
For me also what Kim said was very interesting, to talk about organisms, because also today, if we maybe say a little bit, we're talking about renovating a house here in Topolo for let's call it, a residency place for people, artists, whatever, not to use that word, to come here and to dwell here in the place. We were talking about how to construct a house here, how to make it a part of the village, right? And I really thought of this when we were going into this microcosm, micro scale and micro scale of the house. At the micro scale, I even thought of you know, having this house as a sort of a, as you said, you know, a body without organs. It for me, it would be nice for it not to be an organ. Therefore, we went into this new, let's say, different thought about the design of the house, which could be very, very flexible. You know, that it wouldn't just that it wouldn't just deal with one need of the whole village. It could also deal with very, very different needs, you know, of different people who come here, and that all of these people could connect to this place in their way. So the house would be like a toolbox, a Swiss knife for you know, for not just recognizing the needs of other people, but also you know, emphasizing them, you know, and with let's say having a dynamic house which moves. That's a really interesting idea. So to not give also certain parts of the house the names of different organs, let's say, but to keep it very, very open. For me, that was very important and something to take into consideration.
Yeah, maybe just as you referred to the body without organs, I think, again, I'm not a Deleuze Guattari specialist, just to say that I understand it in my own way, so not...
No one is.
But I guess like this kind of thinking of body without organs is also going away from this organized body and disciplined body, and like a kind of... and it reminds me of our conversation, Elena, with where the centralized hierarchies prevent playfulness. Like they don't allow for playfulness because there are already rules, or like what we've been speaking about, this is how things are done here. And in a way, the body, human body, is such a structure. Like we cannot come with our own rules. We are part of another structure that is already there, right? Like we don't choose, do I want to digest things with my brain or with my right leg? I don't know, like it's not an option, like it's already there. The structure is centralized in this way. But I guess this idea of a body without organs is their attempt to play with what if a body is without organs? What kind of potentials can open if this happens?
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to reflect upon the notion also of contamination, because like in the moment that you receive a recipe, or you gave yourself to a recipe and you digest it and then you perform it, or even just the act of reading it out loud, in a way contaminates what was the first instruction. And as you said, Enea, there are so many factors that change, which can be the environment, which can be also the emotional value that one person put on these words or on this object, which can be. And so I'm thinking also in terms of this interrelationship as contamination. So it's something that fluently goes right and left, goes up, and then if I see it also as a space, as this place, as we were saying before, like that the residence comes and then the new arrived, and there is this passage of knowledge, contamination, and then it's contaminated to the next one, and then to the next one, again and again and again, without at one point being any center. All of a sudden, it's not like this person who started it, but you also might have taken from somebody else. So especially speaking about knowledge and sharing knowledge, I think that's a good thing to keep it in mind, that can also be translated in the architecture, in the design, in the infrastructure of the Gubana or Otopolo, no?
Yeah, I think that's a really, super nice reflection on the word contamination as well, because I think it's also something that Vida talks about a lot, that there's, and we talked a little bit about it with this inside-outside idea, that you hear Vida sort of saying, there's like a rhetoric around, people in the countryside and people coming in, and that I think both ways of that rhetoric being used, of either like people from the city coming to show people out in the country who don't know anything how modern life is, and then the other way around, that you know, you come to the city, to the countryside, to as this this like romanticism idea that you go away as an artist into isolation, into like a sanctuary to be inspired by nature, which is this been around since the romanticism period. But yeah, the idea of contamination, also the fact that contamination is a dirty word, especially now with the pandemic, that I think to actually almost reclaim that it is a two-way thing, and that both rub off on each other, is a really interesting thing to think about. What I'd like to sort of explore though is, I still think there is a difference between inside and outside, and you know, I think there's a danger in, and I don't know what that is. Maybe we can sort of discuss that. I don't know if it's still a rhizomatic thing, but maybe we'll come back to it. But how do you acknowledge what is the difference? That people do have established, people live here and they do have established routines and things that need to be respected, and there's some things have been there for longer, and I don't know if we take that back to the maybe if I ask, like, if we can try and relate that to the metaphor of the network again, with the rhizomatic network of these mycelium contact working with trees that have been there for a long period of time, or maybe the rhizomatic network's been there for even longer. Like, how is this sort of trying to be non-distinguishing between the contaminator and the contaminated? How is that also weighed up against the fact that some people are here for longer, and sort of like, is there a hierarchy of respect, or I don't know, like what is that? Because I think it's the same thing. We had some other discussions, you know, with a shift in my mind when I was, this is going off topic, but a shift in my mind when I was younger of, you know, I grew up in London, a very multicultural city, but I was always told, you know, you shouldn't mention race, you know, that you shouldn't mention the fact that someone's black, and that because, you know, it should be that we're all equal. But actually, like, now that thinking has shifted for me and for a lot of people, I think, of where it's like, no, you need to acknowledge that someone comes from a different background and they have a different experience to you, and to ignore that people have a different experience to you is ridiculous and naive and not. So I think I had a similar reflection of thinking, okay, well, if we just ignore the fact that some people are coming in here and doing something different, or that we're not acknowledging people's different experience of existence or whatever. And how does that work within a rhizomatic idea of community?
Maybe relating to multiplicities.
Sorry.
It sounds like it also relates to multiplicities, right? Like there's also another principle of the rhizomatic being in the world, that acknowledging the multiplicities that there are and that imply difference. And like it's I mean, I grew up in the Soviet Union, so that was like, we are all equal, and like, you know, we are all brothers and sisters, and let's march together. And this was one big show. Like, it's unreal, because and this is also inside outside in this way, also what is inside one's own mind, and then what is being translated from the structure where somebody tells you how to think and who we all are, right? Like, and deleting multiplicities, and in this way also deleting the world of many worlds. And I think it is very important to acknowledge exactly that, and that there is a difference, but it doesn't imply a hierarchical thinking right away.
Yeah, but for me, I mean, I think we kind of solve that problem when we divide private and public space. You know, at a private space, when someone enters my house, they have to respect all of those rules, you know. But in a sense, I think that we want to have a place where Jack did a fantastic example of all of this. When he came here to Topolo, he started to learn on the piano the Philip Glass's piece of glasswork, or what was it, you know? And that piece is very strange because it has like, in the left hand you're playing 8 notes, you know, dun, 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 dun. And in the right hand you're playing triplets, you know. And we're always saying from that day on, I'm always saying that people who come here are the triplet parts, you know. They're just a bit more agitated, and the other hand is doing this slow, very, you know, solid, let's say. But you know, when you come to my house, I would like you to, you know, at least try to get my 8 notes, you know. But when we go to a public space, I really much appreciate if those two work together. In the example of Philip Glass, those two fit perfectly, and they make, you know, the something new, something third, you know, that is not just this or this. They make something qualitatively new. And that for me is something very, very great. And I think it's really in this distinction of the private and public space.
Yeah, thank you. Such a good example. I want to come back also to this inside and outside. And I wanted to question again, like, how can we practice these things of inclusivity also on a very small scale, like really microcosmos. And I wanted to take this room as an example for now. Like, we started this practice maybe half an hour ago, and soon new people will come to us in this room. And in my mind this question came, like, okay, what will we do if they enter? Like, how much should we inform them about what we are doing?
I also thought about the fact, you know, that I sat here next to you, and I was kind of the only one in this 1 square meter. And it made me feel like, you know, I'm you know, taking the microphone for myself.
You know what I wanted to propose, actually, it's so nice how, again, this invisible. So again, just like for me, the rhizome, the very fascinating thing is it is invisible. It is under, or the mycelium. You know, all these networks are actually under the earth, so we don't see them. We don't notice them. But kind of. Also relating to what you said, like how do we include people? And it's like going again into this like dichotomy, as if, right? Like, do I now say like, do I go into the centralized kind of structure, or will it happen otherwise? And if it can happen, then how? Because, and I think for me at least, it has definitely something to do with the body, because indeed, we absorb things with our whole being, but if we don't hide them, like if I don't stop breathing suddenly or stop perceiving reality around me, I can include other people, and they will be like, okay, something is in the air. I sense something, but this other ways of knowing.
I'm really inspired by everything we talked about yesterday and today as well, and seeing this place more as a sort of a central part of a community and part of a rhizometric network, and be just a sort of a neutral node into a bigger structure. And I'm constantly trying to see how we can translate this sort of very valuable, but in a way also a quite abstract way of thinking, into how we can practically translate this into doing a house like this, because then also maybe sometimes boring things come into mind, like how could this translate to a financial structure, or less boring, nicer, how could it translate into how you transform such a building? Because once you figure out the boring financial part, that you can start the act of doing. First we were thinking, we need a company that could transform the building, but after talking more and more this weekend, realization comes into mind that maybe we don't take a company, but we make it into a communal act of actually doing the transformation. That this would be interesting if you see the type of people that are gathered here to this weekend. and with the joy and energy everybody puts into imagining new ideas for such a place. I can imagine that you can, with the same energy, gather a crowd with which you can together do such a transformation, which would maybe be more difficult practically, but maybe be more valuable in the end, and in the end more did you receive more back if you do a transformation in such a way. So
what I love about the rhizome is that everybody can talk about whatever he or she they think, and they all agree, and they assume that they're talking about the same topic, but actually they are interconnected layers with only at the infinite connect. And I think that's what we're doing at the moment.
That we were talking about this, that rhizome is not a metaphor, but it's something actual. But then I just remembered that, for me, you also deal with plants, and plants, also through authors like Michael Marder and people like that, are in actuality that sort of a rhizome, because they do not respond to any sort of a center, right? For me, let's say, it's a good thing to say this, because it's a way to expand also on the topic and on the concept of thought. What is thought, and it's a nice way to bring in also plants, because whenever we talk about thought, we talk about this, we talk about us, right? People, which have a center, which is the brain, right? And we say, so beings without this sort of center do not have thought. But I think that people like that, theorists who try to expand on the notion of thought, they trying to show that, it is a very dispersed, thinking is very dispersed, right? And I think also with people is very dispersed. And also when you said, we cannot choose whether we digest or not, I think that body is in certain ways, and certain parts of bodies are organized, but were organized, also, due to power relations and all of that kind of stuff. So if we take, for example, sexuality, right? Different parts of our body can be very sexualized, right? And I think that with that kind of thought, if we go a bit further, we can see that all of our body and different parts of the body can really be made, and also they can be made into something different, into having different roles in our lives. And just to think of it abstractly, then you say, that is possible. That is very good. I mean, in the sense that we do not have to be in this way, which is a good thing to think about. Because if we think that we do not have to be in a certain way, we can be whatever we want to be. Of course, we have to digest. But digestion also happens in other parts of body.
Kinds of digestions.
Different digestions, and we think of that there. If we think of the fact that there are different digestions, we start to think that all of our body is in certain way digesting. I don't know how that can be useful, but I think it can.
We'll find out when we digest, maybe. Yeah. But actually, just something shortly on what you said. I even don't think that body is a centralized system. I actually think that the body is a decentralized system, and the brain is a kind of a manager, we could say, like organizing and we like kind of structuring things. But I'm thinking with my body now. Like as I'm sitting, I'm thinking. As I'm sensing, I'm thinking. As I'm feeling, I'm thinking. Right? Like so. I think we separated this kind of thinking, feeling, sensing. Like it's all in its own box, and then we prioritize the rational, cognitive kind of way of thinking, and then we said the brain is the boss in the system. But actually, we can also flip it around, and actually the skin is made from the same material as the brain, so it's actually like a thinking organ all along the body, right? Like so we could also think of the body as a decentralized system in this way, as a rhizome, but organized. And this is where I think it gets really interesting, because also with many of you, we were speaking about complete rhizomatic living is a madness. It's like no structure at all, and no center at all. But at the same time, so how does it become maybe rhizomatic and playful and free to make connections and free to be who we want to be, but at the same time organized?
Yeah, no, sure. I think that also, that's why I said of the, having, let's say, a space where a body can be disorganized, and a time for it. What I try to say is that before we started this conversation, we had this exercise, right? And I think that at a certain level, we did disorganize our body. I never use my feet to feel the ground. No, it's true. It may sound silly, but I don't do it. I walk with my feet. I jump with my feet. But I, even though I do stand on the ground, I do not actually feel the ground. So.
Absolutely.
I think that's the thing you're trying also to say. Yeah, that at certain moments, I think, and at certain spaces, stuff like disorganization of our bodies is fruitful, right? So because of me feeling the ground, I dealt with my feet in some other way than I usually do, and that, also the manager up here,
can have a rest.
Yeah, sure.
And can come into reciprocity, right? Many people also drop this word, because I think we rarely actually realize also this reciprocity with the structure beneath us, and that whenever we search for stability, actually it's always there. Like
some rhizome need to interrupt them. They're too constantly talking. Somebody needs to interrupt them.
And this somebody just started.
Chaos. We need to break some structure. Maybe things fall in place through chaos.
Resonating with the conversation. even though I love the topics that you just addressed when I entered, like learning from other species and understanding also our own organism as a decentralized system of receiving information and replying to information to our environments, because I think that's exactly what all of us are very, I think, fortunate to experience through the help of science, and that we start understanding all these processes in plants and other microbes and other animals, and further also that these processes are not only in these other species, but that they also happen in our bodies, and that our guts and our physical memory, that they start discovering more and more that our whole nervous system is a brain itself, and that I think that these are all parallels that are now that they have been discovered in the last couple of years, and now slowly being accepted, of creating bridges between us and other species. But I don't know yet how this can be addressed within that context.
It's totally being addressed, because we were speaking in the beginning that one of the characteristics also of rhizome is that it makes connections. It's like this fundamental openness to connections, and it makes connections everywhere. Like it's not in a linear way, like from this I connect to here, and from this I connect to here. It can start connecting in different directions, and you connected to something that was in the air here, and you connected to something else, So it's like there are multiple, like a bit like what Matteo was addressing, that there are multiple layers in the space. And I think this is, I guess, like, how do we dwell in complexity? This is, for me, the inquiry with the rhizome, and dwelling in the complexity of not controlling life in a way, but kind of learning from that way of being alive, from that way of being a mycelium or a rhizome, or this kind of more less structured structure, or indeed a structure without a center. So it's
Can can I ask you just a question? But do you have, let's say, because I'm very sometimes perplexed of how we can do that, like connect with other species and let's say, you know, other living beings and whatever. It's this is not a critique or whatever. I have my own way, let's say, because I'm a very rational person. I have this way of trying to expand concepts, which are mine. Let's say mine as a human being. Let's say there is a concept of memory. I like it a lot. You know, I think it's very valuable. And for me, it wasn't just saying, you know, it wasn't in showing that, let's say, animals and plants are different from us, you know. So let's say someone would say, you know, even though they do not have memory, I'm not saying that they don't, even though that they don't have memory, they are valuable. For me, I had this other way around of trying to figure out what kind of, how can I stretch the concept of memory to give it also to a plant. Let's say animals, of course, animals have memories, you know. I mean, if you, plants also, that's the thing, you know. I mean, it's, but for me, only observation and studying. I mean, it has to go also through this kind of you know, of this. I would call it a system of expanding our own concepts to bringing them inside, right? Plants. You have a plant there. Sun goes like this. Plants move with the sun. Then they take out the plant, you know, away from the sun. The plant, you know, goes with the sun, even though the sun isn't there. That for me is incredible. And I mean, it's putting the plant into this concept of memory, you know, and also it makes me acknowledge also the fact that the memory is not only here, because plants do not have this here, you know, they have it all over. And for me, that is so fascinating because it means I think that I also have it, you know? Yeah.
So I think I think this is really interesting that we started always looking or for this interspecies connection by projecting aspects of our own organism onto other organisms. So we were interpreting certain actions and certain behaviors of plants and other species with, based on our own behavior within groups or like the way we perceive our environments. But I think what I like what you just said is that you look at the plant and then the plant tells you something about you and not you, like you telling something basically to the plant about. I think this is really, because that's exactly like this, a plant organism like is sensing the environment through like its membrane, through the roots, through like humidity, through smell, like they communicate, like their way of communicating through scent is so sophisticated. And also is part of their memory that is given from generation to generation of plant. That's how they adapt to environments. And they can adapt to environments like billion times faster than we, for example, do. And that's all based on the fact that plants, the species that is forced or became stationary. And you could also think that throughout evolution, they decided to be stationary because they figured out the how do you say, the win in being stationary compared to being possible to move. Like, but it's you could also see that it's much more energy saving to be moved by the elements, you know, rather than moving yourself. Like we decided to move. We could also say we could also just live in the water and let us, you know, like, so yeah.
No, it's true. I also like this plants not moving. You know, we had a lot of discussions about this. I also talked to Michael Marder about it when he said that the way to, he gave a few examples of what plant politics could look like. And he was talking about protests. So let's say the Occupy movement. And, you know, he said that usually protests and stuff like that, you know, was formed in perspective of more animal life, let's say, of moving in hordes or whatever, but then he acknowledged the fact that then let's say one Occupy movement was the one movement that was planting itself in the ground, and that was very it disturbed the system very much so, because it was not used to protesting as a plant. And then of course he talked about the potential of that kind of type of protesting or whatever. But to move back to what you said, I still think that I have a bit of the anthropocentric or whatever way, because it's also my way of being pragmatic, because I think that people care more about themselves than other things. So I try to say, okay, let's take a concept you have in mind and that you appreciate. Let's say people usually do appreciate memory, right? They're afraid of loss of memory. So let's try to put that on the plant, but at the same time, tricking them in the sense, yeah, you're very cool, and all of that, you human being, right? But then showing that, wow, that memory in the plant is so much more, and then people can accept it into their own conception of memory. But it's just me being pragmatic and being very, having strategies also to point stuff out about plants, because we could also, of course, talk about all of the million gazillion cool things about plants, but if someone is not open to those kind of things, he will say just memory is way cooler than all of that, so a human person is way cooler than all of that.
And why do plants need to prove to us that they have a memory so that we can say, okay, then you are like sentient beings, now we take you more seriously than we did before, we just don't just like despise of you, or like
That's a very good question, and I think it's just a strategy, I think, to include more people into the discussion about the importance of plants, because in some way I think that memory and concepts that are connected to memory are actually even more important to the concept of our existence in a way, because if to me it was more important to acknowledge the fact that plants have memory than acknowledging the fact that without plants we could not live. It's a very strange thing, but I think it's maybe because it is a very big part of us being human. We thought of not sharing memory with any other beings, but we know that we share existence with other beings. So I think that at a certain point, it's a more important thing in a human's life. And it's just me being pragmatic about it,
What I started wondering was that for me, the memory of a plant is not like, for me, a memory, or that's just now how I was thinking about it, is something that it's an experience that you perceive with your multiple senses, and you absorb it, but then it wanders through a kind of filter. So, and for me, the memory of a plant, I think, at least what we have been talking now about, is more the pure experience. And this perception of the environment is being saved, for example, in a seed, like bit by bit over 1,000 million of years.
I want to ground it. That's why I'm sitting on the floor. I'm really curious about what you said, this passing on of knowledge through plants and how they adapt to space and to their environment, and how they gather knowledge and smells and experiences, and maybe they do it through seeds or spores or other ways. And I'm really curious if we can take it back to what we are talking here this weekend, like what could be ways of communicating and passing on knowledge that we, in maybe a short time here, gather, experience, collect, harvest, share. What are ways to pass it on to others?
I think it's a very interesting question, and it's maybe also dealing with this kind of tacit knowledge, like not outspoken knowledge, while working the garden or working the landscape. And I think if you look at rituals or tradition, was a way that people use to pass on this knowledge and pass on this kind of know-how how to deal with special plants in this kind of surroundings. So yeah, I'm fascinated or intrigued by, let's say, starting this new kind of rituals or this new kind of traditions in order to pass on this knowledge. And I think we addressed it earlier this weekend that the residency could kind of overlap, or there could be a kind of calendar which is kind of helping to pass on this this knowledge. So yeah, maybe we could think about new forms of tradition.
Do you have a ritual in mind? Do you have like a...
Maybe I need to think of one.
Burying some butter.
Yeah, burying some butter. Yeah, but
Could you say a bit more about that, because I missed this one?
well, earlier this week there was some butter made by Philip, and
many others.
Yeah, and many others. Yeah, we weren't here yet, but we were part of the morning burial of the butter, and yeah, so we dug a hole somewhere on the clean terraces, and there were some stones placed in this hole, and the butter was covered in, I think, wine leaves, grape leaves, and it was buried. And I think by kind of digging this hole, you kind of get an understanding of what kind of soil you're dealing with, and by burying the butter, you kind of have the responsibility to kind of dig it out also the next year. So it's about some kind of commitment towards the landscape. So yeah, I think maybe rituals have this kind of maybe, I'm not sure, but they could have this negative connotation of kind of things from the past. But I'm fascinated in maybe say contemporary rituals, and to illustrate the rituals, I think the new ritual of burying the butter and digging it out could be, let's say, a new kind of relationship with this place and with this landscape. And I think in order to succeed with the things we are trying to address this weekend, maybe it is about this new form of relation with this place, and rethinking and redefining this relation. And I think we can learn a lot from the past, but we should also try to establish these new kind of rituals and relationships.
Thanks for tuning in to Woods and the Sound this month. We also thank Tosca Terran, an interdisciplinary artist working at the intersection of arts and ecology, for the mesmerizing soundscape you just listened to. It was recorded live during the Chaos Fungorum installation for Nuit Blanche 2018 at the Baba Yaga Collective Studio Gallery in Toronto, Canada. If you would like to explore further with us the notions of ecological being, we invite you to come for a collective practice dojo, which is taking place online every month. As well as join us on the trails of Foresta Seasonal Academy, the learning experience dedicated to ecologies of human and modern human vibrancy and restoration of bonding. For more details and registration, you will find the links in podcast notes, as well as all the credits for audio and video context markers of this podcast. Do send us your questions, answers, comments. Would love to hear from you. And see you in the woods.